Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Z Sci-Fi Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you find yourself enjoying our story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hard-working staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these adventures for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link found in the description or the pinned comments of this video. Earth was no longer a world. It was a stripped carcass, picked clean by the Galactic Council, known as the Aetheris. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was now a perpetual bruised violet, choked with the thick exhaust of 10,000 atmospheric processors. Below this toxic canopy lay the Sol mining colony, a sprawling nightmare of rusted steel, grinding gears, and deafening industrial roars. Human beings, stripped of their history and their dignity, moved like hollow shells through the soot. They hauled slag, breathed ash, and died young, all to feed the insatiable hunger of their alien overlords. The Aetheris consumed planetary core energy, and Earth was simply their latest meal. Governor Ethan Burgess stood on the high observation deck of Sector 4, his spine curved in a posture of permanent subjugation. He wore a heavy industrial coat stained with dark oil, his face lined with the premature aging that afflicted every human left alive. Before him stood the Aetheris delegation. They were towering, elegant figures, clad in shimmering bioarmor that physically repelled the grime of the facility. They did not breathe the foul air. Their suits filtered out the misery of Earth, leaving them pure and untouched. "The annual extraction report, Exalted Ones," Ethan said, his voice a gravelly whisper. He handed a heavy data slate to the lead inspector, a creature named Kalen, whose features were sharp and bioluminescent. "Yields are up by 2% this solar cycle. The core tap is functioning at maximum capacity." Kalen barely glanced at the screen. His glowing eyes were fixed on the colossal structure looming outside the reinforced observation window. It was a kinetic accelerator, a railgun of gargantuan proportions, its barrel stretching kilometers into the bruised sky. Around its base, thousands of human workers swarmed like insects, securing massive pods of compressed core energy to the loading sleds. "Fascinating," Kalen sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You animals still rely on kinetic propulsion, magnetic slingshots. You hurl rocks into orbit like primitive apes throwing dirt." The other Aetheris delegates let out a synchronized, harmonic hum that served as laughter. They found humanity entirely pathetic. "It is highly inefficient," another delegate chimed in. "A simple anti-gravity tether could transport the ore pods without the deafening noise and the absurd energy waste. But I suppose one cannot expect higher cognitive engineering from a species that poisoned its own atmosphere." Ethan swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He bowed lower, his eyes fixed firmly on the steel floor grates. "We make do with what the Council permits us, my lords. The kinetic accelerators are durable. They serve the purpose of delivering the daily quota to your orbital collectors." "See that they continue to do so," Kalen snapped. "Your species exists only because you are marginally cheaper than automated labor drones." Ethan turned toward the factory floor communications terminal. He gripped the heavy microphone, forcing his voice into a harsh, barking command that echoed across the misery below. "Shift supervisors. Increase the loading pace. The Exalted Ones require efficiency. Any worker falling behind quota will face a half-ration penalty for the next 10 cycles. Move those ore pods." Down below, the exhausted workers flinched at the booming voice. Shoulders slumped further, muscles strained to the point of tearing, and the relentless rhythm of the subjugated continued. It was a pathetic display of a broken species, exactly what the Aetheris wanted to see. Kalen stepped closer to the glass, silently observing the frantic activity. Suddenly, his luminescent eyes narrowed. He raised a slender, armored finger and pointed toward Railgun number 7, positioned on the far edge of the vast extraction crater. "Governor," Kalen said, his tone shifting sharply from mockery to cold suspicion. "Explain the positioning of that accelerator." Ethan felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine, but his face remained perfectly passive. "I do not understand, Inspector." "Do not play the fool," Kalen hissed, turning his piercing gaze onto the human. "The orbital collection array sits at geostationary point Alpha. Railgun number 7 is deviated by at least 4 degrees. It is not pointing at the collector. It is aimed precisely into the empty void of deep space. If it fires, the cargo will be lost forever." The silence in the observation deck was sudden and absolute. The mechanical hum of the factory seemed to fade away. The Aetheris guards rested their hands on the hilts of their plasma weapons. Without a single second of hesitation, Ethan dropped to his knees. The hard steel bruised his joints, but he threw himself forward, pressing his forehead against the grimy floor right at Kalen's armored boots. "Forgive me, Exalted One," Ethan cried out, his voice trembling with manufactured terror. "Please, I beg your immense mercy. The alignment gears on that ancient scrap heap are rusted through. The locking mechanisms fail under the heavy atmospheric pressure. It is poor maintenance, nothing more. We lack the lubricant rations to keep the turning tracks smooth. I will have 10 workers executed for this incompetence immediately." He groveled, shaking like a terrified animal. He let his dignity shatter into a million pieces, weeping dry tears of submission. He was the perfect picture of a cowardly, broken governor, desperate to save his own pathetic life. Kalen stared down at the trembling human. The sharp suspicion in his alien eyes slowly melted back into absolute, aristocratic disgust. He kicked Ethan in the shoulder, sending the human sprawling onto his back. "Pathetic," Kalen spat. "Your incompetence is staggering. Burgess, fix the rust. If I see another misaligned barrel, I will have you smelted down with the planetary slag." "Yes, my lord." "Thank you, my lord," Ethan babbled, scrambling back onto his hands and knees. The delegation turned in unison and swept out of the observation deck, leaving the sharp stench of ozone in their wake. As the heavy blast doors sealed shut behind them, the pathetic trembling in Ethan's hands instantly stopped. He stood up slowly, calmly brushing the dirt from his heavy coat. The cowardly panic vanished from his face, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating, and terrifying resolve. He looked out the window at Railgun number 7. He knew exactly why it was deviated by 4 degrees. It was not rusted. It was not broken. It was flawlessly maintained and perfectly calibrated. The giant weapon was not pointing into empty space at all. It was locked with dead center precision onto the exact coordinates of the Aetheris Vanguard fleet's secret hyperspace transit lane. And it was already armed. The low hum of the encrypted communications terminal cut through the absolute silence of Ethan Burgess' hidden subterranean bunker. This chamber was located exactly 10 miles below the toxic crust of the planet, shielded from alien sensors by a dense layer of lead and magnetized iron. The screen bathed Ethan, exhausted, face in a harsh green glow. The message scrolling across the monitor was a Level 1 priority directive intercepted directly from the Aetheris High Command. The words translated into pure dread. Directive core fracture was authorized. The Aetheris had realized the planetary core energy was dropping faster than their initial calculations predicted. They were not going to wait another 100 years. They had decided to shatter the planet entirely and harvest the remaining energy in one single, catastrophic event. The execution date was set for precisely 72 hours from now. Ethan slammed his fist against the reinforced steel desk. The timeline had completely collapsed. He immediately engaged the silent alarm protocol, sending a burst of encrypted static across the localized resistance network. Within 20 minutes, the leaders of the human underground assembled in the cavernous tactical room. These were men and women hardened by decades of soot and suffering. They carried the heavy burden of survival in their hollowed eyes. The air in the room was thick with tension, smelling of old sweat and weapon oil. No one spoke a single word as Ethan projected the intercepted directive onto the main wall. "The timeline is dead," Ethan declared, his voice cold and flat. "The overlords plan to crack this world open in 3 days. They believe we are depleted. They believe we have given them everything." A murmur of panic rippled through the sector commanders. A woman named Sarah, bearing deep scars across her cheek from a plasma burn, stepped forward. "Then we are finished, Ethan. We have barely gathered enough munitions to arm 3 sectors. Our stockpile is useless against their orbital shields." Ethan shook his head slowly. The time for deception among his own people was over. "You have all lived in the dark," he said, stepping into the center of the dimly lit room. The flickering lights cast long, ominous shadows against the reinforced concrete walls. "For 50 years, the Aetherists thought we were mining ore for their collection arrays. For 50 years, even you believed we were stealing scraps of that ore to build crude rifles and makeshift bombs. You are wrong. We have not been mining. We have been hollowing." He keyed a command into the master console. The holographic projection shifted, revealing a complete, terrifying schematic of the Earth. But it was not the solid sphere of rock and magma the history books described. It was a terrifying mechanical honeycomb, a masterclass in covert engineering. "Every tunnel you dug under the guise of extraction," Ethan continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Every cavern you collapsed was a calculated architectural excavation. We gutted our own world. We turned the entire crust into a structural mounting matrix. The railguns on the surface are not mining equipment. They are the firing pins of a weapon so massive it requires an entire planet to house it. Humanity is not holding a stockpile. Humanity is holding a loaded gun." Stunned silence fell over the room. The sheer scale of the revelation was paralyzing. But before the commanders could comprehend the magnitude of their own secret, the tactical console erupted in a blaring, rhythmic alarm. Red warning lights bathed the room in the color of blood. Sarah rushed to the sensor array. Her fingers flew across the mechanical switches. "We have a massive security breach," she shouted over the blaring siren. "A localized gravity anomaly is spiking near Surface Sector 9. It is a stolen Aetherius stealth skiff. Someone bypassed the lockdown codes." "Who?" Ethan demanded, his jaw clenched tight. "Commander Vance," Sarah replied, her voice breaking with furious disbelief. "His biological signature just cleared the atmospheric processor vents. He is burning hard for the upper exosphere. He downloaded the complete schematic of our subterranean network right before he launched." The room descended into absolute chaos. Vance had sold them out. He was flying a cloaked vessel straight to the Aetherius orbital relay to trade the survival of the human race for a comfortable seat at the master table. "Shoot him down," a commander roared. "Fire the surface batteries." "We cannot," Sarah screamed back. "The ship is entirely cloaked from thermal and kinetic tracking. By the time the surface batteries pivot, he will be completely out of the atmosphere. Conventional air defense is completely blind. If he reaches the relay, the Aetherius will drop plasma bombardments on our exact coordinates within 5 minutes." Death was suddenly breathing down their necks. The paranoia that had kept them alive for decades was failing them now. There was no margin for error. They were seconds away from total extermination. Ethan did not shout. He did not panic. He turned his back on the chaotic arguing and walked calmly toward a dark corner of the tactical room. He stood before a heavy, dust-covered terminal. It was an industrial console, labeled clearly as a short-range or transport terminal. It was a crude, rudimentary teleportation pad used to move heavy slag across the factory floor. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Sarah asked. "That is an industrial teleporter. Its maximum range is barely 2 miles. It cannot reach the exosphere. You cannot send a strike team up there." "I am not sending a strike team," Ethan said quietly. He wiped the grease from the primary targeting scanner. "And I am not aiming at the orbital relay." His hands moved with terrifying precision. He tapped into the deep space telemetry network. He did not need to lock onto the stealth ship visual profile. He only needed the faint gravitational ripple its experimental engines left behind in the fabric of space. His fingers danced over the rusted keys, isolating the tiny wave of distortion. He found the ripple. He locked the targeting matrix onto the fleeing vessel, bypassing every known safety protocol ever written for the device. Then, he began to input a set of spatial coordinates that made absolutely no logical sense for a short-range machine. He was calculating planetary alignments, orbital velocities, and the raw gravitational pull of the largest mass in the solar system. "Target locked," Ethan whispered to himself. He grabbed the heavy mechanical lever on the side of the console. He did not hesitate. He pulled it down with a violently decisive motion. Deep beneath the surface, a massive surge of stored energy slammed through the archaic machine. A blinding flash of blue light pulsed through the tactical room, accompanied by a sound like tearing metal. Up in the exosphere, the invisible stealth skiff carrying the traitor Vance vanished from reality. It did not explode. It did not crash. It was simply erased from local space. Sarah stared at the sensor readout, her eyes wide with shock. "The gravity anomaly is gone. He is just gone. Where did you send him?" Ethan turned away from the console. His face was devoid of any emotion. He looked like a man who had already accepted his place in hell. "I sent him to Jupiter," Ethan stated coldly. "Directly into the center of the Great Red Spot. The ambient pressure at those coordinates is roughly 100 million times our atmospheric normal. The ship, and the traitor inside it, were crushed into a sphere the size of a marble before the teleportation flash even faded." The commanders stared at Ethan in absolute terror and awe. The Aetherists thought they were dealing with broken animals. They had no idea they were facing a predator, willing to use the universe itself as a method of execution. The spark of the rebellion had not just been lit. It had been forged in the crushing storms of a gas giant. "Prepare the surface arrays," Ethan ordered, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The Aetherists will notice the missing skiff soon enough. The war begins today." Deep space sensors screamed across the subterranean command center, bathing the concrete walls in frantic crimson light. The traitor had never delivered his warning, but the bureaucracy of extermination required no specific provocation. The Aetherists High Command, executing their accelerated timeline for the planetary harvesting operation, deployed their Vanguard fleet to sterilize the orbital pathways. They tore through the fabric of real space with violent arrogance, an armada of jagged obsidian dreadnoughts and sleek predatory cruisers that blocked out the stars. They arranged themselves in a geometric blockade formation over the bruised violet atmosphere of Earth. There were exactly 347 capital ships, each one bristling with antimatter lances and thermal incinerators. Aboard the command dreadnought, Fleet Supreme Commander Vielle stood upon his elevated crystalline command dais. He looked down at the tactical hololith displaying the dying world below, feeling nothing but cold apathy. "Activate quantum shielding across the entire armada," Vielle ordered, his voice echoing through the sterile bridge. "Bring the primary tectonic disruptor online. We will burn the crust to ash before the harvester ships arrive to crack the mantle." His tactical officers moved with synchronized precision. A shimmering iridescent energy matrix enveloped the entire fleet. The quantum shields were absolute. They manipulated subatomic probabilities, ensuring that any physical kinetic strike or concentrated plasma burst would simply phase out of existence upon contact. To the Aetherists, The humans were helpless insects, trapped under an unbreakable dome. Vile ordered the tectonic disruptor to begin its charging sequence, giving the apes exactly 10 minutes to witness their impending doom. Down in the lead-line command bunker, Ethan Burgess watched the tactical display as massive energy spikes bloomed in orbit. Quantum shields are fully deployed across their formation. "Governor," Sarah reported, her voice tight but disciplined. "Their main tectonic weapon is drawing power directly from their dark matter cores. It will reach critical firing threshold in precisely 9 minutes." Ethan did not blink. He stepped up to the master targeting pedestal. The entire hollowed-out architecture of Earth hummed beneath his boots. The hum grew into a vibration that rattled the teeth of everyone in the room. "Synchronize all surface batteries," Ethan commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "Link the targeting subroutines to the planetary master clock. Bypass all thermal safety limiters. Disregard barrel degradation warnings. I want a full atmospheric override across every sector." Across the globe, thousands of gargantuan magnetic accelerators roared to life. The heavy industrial camouflage, the rusted loading cranes, and the fake ore silos all fell away, revealing the terrifying geometry of the colossal weapons. "We have a synchronized firing solution," Sarah announced, sweat pouring down her face. "Targets are mathematically locked, but Governor, our kinetic rounds physically cannot pierce a quantum probability barrier. They will just bounce off into the void." Ethan slammed his hand down on the heavy brass firing mechanism. "Execute Alpha Strike." The Earth violently shook, as if the planet itself had taken a deep breath and roared. Over 9,000 massive railguns fired in perfect, terrifying unison. The sheer kinetic recoil triggered minor seismic tremors across 3 continents, cracking the artificial bedrock and sending plumes of dust miles into the air. A deafening apocalyptic roar tore across the planet as a storm of solid tungsten punched through the toxic clouds. The friction from the launch ignited the upper atmosphere, turning the sky a searing white. The massive projectiles streaked toward the alien armada at a massive fraction of the speed of light, leaving trails of burning plasma in their wake. Aboard the Aetheris flagship, proximity alarms began to wail incessantly. Vile watched the massive kinetic barrage rushing toward his fleet on the tactical display. The sheer volume of incoming fire was momentarily staggering, but his faith in their superior technology never wavered. "The primitive apes are throwing rocks in their final moments," Vile sneered, casually folding his arms. "Maintain your current coordinates. Do not break formation. Let them exhaust their pathetic arsenals against the shields." But the massive railgun rounds did not strike the glowing quantum barriers. Instead, they streaked right past the dreadnoughts, weaving violently through the vast empty corridors of space between the Aetheris vessels. Some flew high, skimming dozens of miles above the cruisers. Others plunged deep below the blockade line, disappearing into the dark void behind the fleet. Out of 9,000 perfectly aimed projectiles, not a single one made physical contact with an enemy ship. "It is a total miss," the alien tactical officer reported, a cruel, mocking smile forming on his lips. "Their crude targeting systems must have critically malfunctioned from the atmospheric friction during their desperate launch. They missed entirely." Vol threw his head back and laughed, a harsh sound of pure arrogance. "Arm the tectonic disruptor. Route all auxiliary power to the main firing chamber. End their miserable existence right now." Back on Earth, Ethan watched the complex telemetry data stream across his primary monitor. The room was dead silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans. The red dots representing the fired projectiles reached their exact designated spatial coordinates flawlessly, surrounding the enemy fleet in a massive sphere. "Rounds have reached optimal spatial dispersal," Sarah stated, staring at the raw incoming data with widening eyes as she realized the true tactical pattern. Signal strength across the network is at 100%. Ethan allowed a cold, ruthless smile to touch his weathered lips. Drop their kinetic camouflage. Activate the anchors. The projectiles drifting aimlessly around the Aetheris fleet violently shed their metallic casings. They were never solid penetrators, meant for physical destruction. They were highly advanced, cloaked spatial anchor nodes. The exact moment Ethan transmitted the planetary activation sequence, the thousands of nodes detonated, but not with fire or shrapnel. They detonated with raw, concentrated gravitational force. Millions of invisible, hyper-dense spatial tethers lashed out from the nodes simultaneously, violently connecting to one another in an intricate, mathematically perfect geometric web. In a fraction of a microsecond, a colossal, three-dimensional spatial cage snapped shut around the entire Vanguard fleet. Local space itself abruptly crystallized into a solid, unyielding state. Aboard the command dreadnought, warning sirens began screaming in a terrifying pitch Vale had never heard before. "Supreme Commander!" the tactical officer shrieked, absolute panic shattering his composure. "Our primary thruster engines are burning out. The quantum shields are collapsing inward under massive dimensional pressure. We cannot move forward. We cannot move backward. We are entirely locked in local space." The Vanguard fleet, armed to the teeth and ready to shatter the world, was completely paralyzed, trapped permanently, like helpless insects caught in a terrifying invisible web, spun by the very creatures they had mocked. The spatial cage was absolute. Aboard the crippled command dreadnought, Supreme Commander Vile frantically pounded his fists against the crystalline console. Every primary thruster was locked in an invisible vice. The quantum shields, once an impenetrable dome of arrogance, were now crushing inward under the sheer dimensional pressure generated by the human anchor nodes. The great Aetheris Vanguard fleet was entirely paralyzed. Panic, a raw and primal emotion that the exalted alien race had long believed they had evolved beyond, flooded the bridge. "Supreme Commander, the dimensional pressure is increasing," the tactical officer screamed, his luminescent eyes wide with sheer terror. "We cannot break the tether lattice. The local space around us has crystallized. We are completely immobilized." Vile bared his jagged teeth in a snarl of pure hatred. If the primitive apes believed they could simply cage the masters of the galaxy, they were sorely mistaken. The Aetheris would not suffer the indignity of capture. They would not allow their divine armada to become a monument to human defiance. "Override all safety limiters on the dark matter cores," Vile roared, his voice trembling with manic desperation. "If we cannot break out, we will shatter the cage and everything else within 1 billion miles. Initiate total core overload. We will trigger a cascading antimatter detonation. Let the entire solar system burn with us." The order was apocalyptic. The crew hesitated for only a fraction of a second before plunging their hands into the terminal controls, initiating the suicide sequence. Deep within the bowels of the 347 trapped vessels, the containment fields surrounding their dark matter reactors deliberately collapsed. Down in the subterranean command center on Earth, the tactical hololith flared with blinding crimson warnings. The sudden spike in exotic radiation was unmistakable. "Governor," Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper, as she stared at the terrifying telemetry data cascading across her screen. "They are overloading their primary drive cores, all of them simultaneously. The energy output is going exponential. We are looking at a cascading antimatter detonation." Ethan Burgess did not move. He stood perfectly still before the main viewing screen. "Time until critical mass is reached?" Ethan asked, his tone so devoid of emotion it bordered on the synthetic. 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Sarah replied, panic finally bleeding into her strict discipline. "Governor, a blast of that magnitude will not just vaporize the cage. It will ignite the upper atmosphere of Earth, boil the oceans, and crack the mantle. The shockwave will tear through the inner planets and destabilize the sun. They are trying to take the entire solar system with them. Ethan slowly adjusted his heavy coat. The countdown numbers ticked away mercilessly on the main display, flashing in angry red intervals. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, and 50 seconds. The threat of total cosmic annihilation hung heavy in the suffocating air of the bunker. Yet, Ethan looked entirely undisturbed. He was the maestro of a symphony that had been written 50 years ago, and he was simply waiting for the crescendo. "Reroute all planetary power to the Railgun matrix," Ethan commanded. "Initiate Phase 2. Across the hollowed-out crust of the planet, the thousands of massive kinetic accelerators that had fired the spatial anchors began to transform. Their magnetic rails shifted, locking into new, impossibly complex geometric configurations. The deep, harmonic rumble of the Earth intensified until it felt as though the planet itself was humming a primordial tune. This was not a weapon system designed for physical bombardment. The railgun network was merely the conductive framework for something far more profound. It was a macro-scale teleportation matrix, drawing power straight from the rotational momentum of the planet. Light began to bend around the Earth. The bruised violet atmosphere shimmered as raw spatial energy flooded the atmospheric layers, creating a blinding halo of pure white plasma. The laws of physics began to warp, groaning under the sheer weight of human ambition. Light years away, deep within the obsidian spires of the Aetheris homeworld, the Galactic Council watched the unfolding nightmare through their advanced hyperspace telemetry satellites. The High Lords sat in stunned, horrified silence. The telemetry feeds displayed the massive energy signatures engulfing the human homeworld. They recognized the foundational mathematics of a spatial fold. The primitive humans were attempting a mass teleportation event. The Council braced themselves. They fully expected a massive, hidden human armada to materialize directly outside the spatial cage, to rain down physical destruction upon their trapped vanguard fleet. They waited for the inevitable swarm of crude iron warships. But the sensors detected absolutely no human vessels launching. There were no frigates, no fighters, no dreadnoughts waiting in the void. "What are they doing?" the Grand Chancellor of the Aetheris whispered, watching the feed in total bewilderment. "They are bending the fabric of the universe, but they are sending nothing." They were wrong. Ethan was not sending ships. "Phase 2 is locked," Sarah announced, her hands flying across the console. "Target acquired. Spatial fold is completely stable." "Execute," Ethan ordered softly. He did not aim the teleportation matrix at the surface of the Earth. He aimed it precisely at the desolate, cratered mass orbiting above them. For 50 years, while the Aetheris believed humanity was toiling in the dirt, the Resistance had secretly drilled deep into the core of the Moon. They had reinforced its structural integrity with trillions of tons of super-dense carbon plating, turning the celestial body into a solid, unbreakable sphere of overwhelming mass. With a blinding flash that eclipsed the sun, the teleportation matrix fired. The Moon simply vanished from Earth orbit. A fraction of a microsecond later, the fabric of space inside the invisible cage holding the Aetheris fleet tore violently open. The Grand Vanguard fleet was packed tightly into a geometric blockade formation, suspended motionless in the void. Suddenly, occupying the exact same spatial coordinates as the center of their fleet, a celestial body materialized. Ethan had teleported the entire reinforced mass of the Moon directly into the heart of the trapped armada. The physics of the event were absolute and unforgiving. Two objects of mass could not occupy the same space. The sudden, violent insertion of billions of megatons of solid matter triggered a catastrophic spatial displacement. The immense, instantaneous gravitational shear was unfathomable. There was no grand explosion. There was no fiery climax. There was only the brutal, silent crunch of orbital mechanics. The dark matter cores never had the chance to detonate. The massive alien dreadnoughts, with their impenetrable quantum shields and aristocratic arrogance, were instantly crushed flat. The sheer gravitational pressure of the moon, sudden materialization, compressed the exotic metals and bio-armor of the fleet into microscopic dust. 347 capital ships were simply erased, smeared across the armored surface of the lunar rock like insects on a windshield. The spatial cage dissolved, its purpose fulfilled. The moon drifted silently in the empty void, surrounded by a faint, shimmering ring of debris that was once the pride of the Galactic Council. Down in the bunker, the alarms faded into total silence. Humanity had just annihilated a god-tier armada without firing a single explosive round. The news of the total annihilation of the Vanguard fleet struck the Aetheris homeworld with the force of a supernova. Driven by absolute terror and wounded pride, the Galactic Council unleashed their ultimate weapon, the Grand Armada. Millions of obsidian dreadnoughts darkened the sun, casting a permanent, terrifying shadow over the dying Earth. But their true weapon was not plasma or kinetic bombardment. The supercarrier at the heart of the formation activated a terrifying technology known as the chronospatial anchor. An invisible, oppressive wave of energy violently washed over the entire solar system. In the human command bunker, every teleportation matrix terminal sparked and died. The mathematical fabric of reality was forcibly nailed to the floor. The anchor locked local space-time, completely neutralizing humanity's ability to fold space or shift matter. The playing field was not just leveled, it was welded shut. With the human spatial advantage dead, the Grand Armada began the systematic slaughter. Antimatter strikes rained from the heavens, vaporizing mountain ranges and cracking the already fragile tectonic plates. On the surface above Ethan's subterranean fortress, the last organized human defense forces fought with suicidal desperation. These were entirely adult battalions, men and women who had spent their entire lives under the boot of alien oppression, willingly feeding themselves into the meat grinder to buy a few precious minutes. The underground comm channels were a nightmare of desperate final words and the sickening crunch of orbital strikes. Thousands of brave soldiers were incinerated in the ash. The ground above the bunker shook violently, raining concrete dust and sparks down upon the remaining tactical officers. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, heavy with the stench of impending death and total defeat. Then, the colossal steel blast doors of the inner sanctum were blown inward. The explosion deafened everyone in the room. Through the blinding smoke and searing heat stepped the Aetheris Grand Executor, a towering warlord wrapped in iridescent, impenetrable bioarmor. Elite shock troops flooded the room, their weapons locking onto the unarmed humans. The Grand Executor moved with slow, predatory grace. He walked straight to Ethan Burgess, raised a brutally heavy plasma pistol, and pressed the glowing hot barrel directly against the center of Ethan's forehead. The alien warlord did not pull the trigger immediately. Instead, he gave a sharp hand signal to his communications officer. Within seconds, a live, unencrypted broadcast feed was forcibly established, transmitting the visual feed to the high halls of the Galactic Council and across every subjugated world in the Empire. The entire galaxy was forced to watch the final, pathetic humiliation of the human rebellion. "The parlor tricks of a primitive species end today," the Grand Executor declared, his voice resonating with supreme, absolute authority. "Our chronospatial anchor is absolute. Your reality-bending toys are broken. Now, you face the raw power of the Council. Surrender the core mathematical algorithms of your spatial folding matrix, or I will execute you and every single survivor cowering in this dirt." Ethan stared up into the merciless, glowing eyes of the warlord. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Slowly, agonizingly, the human governor sank to his knees. The heavy, grime-covered industrial coat hit the floor with a dull thud. Trembling, Ethan reached into his coat and withdrew a solid-state data drive. "It is all here," Ethan said, his voice cracking, projecting the perfect image of a broken, desperate man begging for scraps. "The entire source code. The complete railgun matrix architecture. Take it. Take the power. I just beg you to spare the lives of the last few thousand humans left in this sector." The Grand Executor snatched the data drive from Ethan's trembling hand, letting out a deep, rumbling laugh of absolute victory. Blinded by his own arrogance and the intoxicating lure of ultimate technological supremacy, the alien commander turned and plugged the physical drive directly into the master data port of his encrypted gauntlet. The gauntlet was directly linked to the central supercomputer of the supercarrier orbiting above. He stood tall, believing he was downloading the key to eternal cosmic dominance, proving once and for all that humanity was nothing but a stepping stone for the Aetheris. But down on the floor, staring at the scarred concrete, the terror in Ethan's eyes instantly vanished. His mind was razor-sharp, cold, and utterly calm. The desperate defense, the horrific casualties, the groveling surrender on a galactic broadcast. It was all a meticulously orchestrated lie. Ethan desperately needed the impregnable chronospatial anchor lowered from the inside, and he knew that the only key capable of unlocking that door was the blinding, insatiable greed of the Aetheris themselves. The instant the solid-state drive interfaced with the master data port of the alien gauntlet, the execution protocol initiated. The Grand Executor expected a stream of complex spatial algorithms and mathematical architectural blueprints. Instead, he unleashed an apocalyptic digital plague. It was a logic bomb, a highly aggressive, self-replicating synthetic virus crafted over 50 years of human suffering. It bypassed the quantum firewalls of the supercarrier central computer in a fraction of a millisecond. Before the towering alien warlord could even register the sudden flashing error codes on his gauntlet, the virus violently seized absolute control of the flagship system architecture. Deep in the orbit above Earth, the immense power grids of the Aetheris vessel flickered, screamed, and obeyed their new human master. "What have you done?" the Grand Executor roared, his luminescent eyes widening in absolute horror as the lights within the subterranean bunker shifted from hostile red to emergency amber. Down on his knees, Ethan Burgess did not answer. He simply looked up, the facade of a broken man evaporating completely, leaving only the icy glare of an apex predator. High above, the chronospatial anchor, the unbreakable lock on local reality, shuddered and died. The mathematical restraints on the solar system evaporated instantly. The virus did not just disable the weapon, it weaponized the supercarrier's own dark matter core, forcing the vessel to forcefully rip open a colossal teleportation gateway directly in front of the Grand Armada. The portal spanned hundreds of miles across, a swirling, violent vortex of blinding blue and violet light that threatened to swallow the stars themselves. Simultaneously, the last surviving railgun batteries on the battered surface of Earth roared to life. They did not fire spatial nodes or kinetic penetrators. With an earth-shattering sonic boom, they launched massive tungsten anchors trailing thick, heavy lines of hyper-advanced superconducting cable. These immense harpoons tore through the bruised sky and slammed violently into the armored underbelly of the supercarrier hovering in low orbit. The anchors pierced the heavy hull, hooking deep into the primary energy core of the flagship with ruthless precision. Aboard the millions of alien vessels, proximity alarms wailed in a frantic, terrifying symphony. The fleet attempted to reverse their thrusters, desperate to pull away from the massive spatial tear that had opened right off their bows. But the portal exit was not calibrated for anywhere within the known galaxy. Ethan had hardwired the destination coordinates to terminate merely millimeters away from the event horizon of a supermassive black hole located in a distant, uncharted sector of the universe. The sheer, unfathomable gravitational pull of the singularity bled through the gateway, violently warping the fabric of space. On Earth, the tethered railguns engaged their massive hydraulic retraction engines. They violently yanked the superconducting cables, pulling the supercarrier primary energy core wildly out of alignment. The resulting sudden shift in mass combined perfectly with the infinite gravitational vacuum bleeding through the portal, triggered a catastrophic gravity storm. The vortex violently expanded with hungry ferocity. The supercarrier was ripped from the sky, instantly sucked through the gateway. The rest of the Grand Armada blindly followed. Millions of invincible dreadnoughts, sleek cruisers, and the absolute pride of the Aetheris Empire were dragged into the swirling abyss like dust into a hurricane. As they crossed the threshold of the event horizon, the immense tidal forces of the singularity stretched and shredded their indestructible armor. The entire armada was reduced to a stream of subatomic particles in a matter of seconds. Then, the teleportation matrix burned itself out from the sheer strain, and the portal violently collapsed, leaving nothing but empty, silent space where an empire had just stood. Inside the shattered bunker, the elite Aetheris shock troops dropped their weapons, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what their tactical feeds had just displayed. The Grand Executor stumbled backward, dropping his plasma pistol. His majestic armor suddenly looked like a cheap tin suit on a frightened animal. Ethan Burgess slowly rose to his feet. He calmly brushed the concrete dust from the shoulder of his heavy industrial coat. He walked past the trembling warlord and approached the live broadcast terminal. The feed was still transmitting directly to the high halls of the Galactic Council. Ethan stared straight into the camera, looking into the terrified eyes of the alien lords light years away. Humanity is entirely ready to negotiate a lasting peace treaty and share our spatial technology, Ethan declared, his voice echoing across the cosmos with unyielding authority. But you must always remember one thing. Our railguns are always loaded. The broadcast cut to black. The Galactic Council crumbled in profound terror, realizing their alien hegemony was completely shattered, and the age of human dominance had officially begun. Thank you so much to all of our incredible listeners for joining us today for this epic journey. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your location in the comments below if you truly enjoyed today's story and want to help us keep this channel alive. Please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code right on your screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the description or the pinned comments. Your generosity directly allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and empowering them to continue creating even more amazing stories to serve you, our wonderful audience. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next adventure.